But I want to take a bit of a broader view, if you will, of the fruit of the Spirit. Carl Sandburg, the great poet, says, "There is an eagle in me that wants to soar, and there is a hippopotamus in me that wants to wallow in the mud." We tend to be, all of us, in one way or another, dual people. There tends to be within us, as Paul will describe it, the flesh. Now, you need to know there are two words that Paul uses that can be translated body or flesh. He uses them consistently throughout the New Testament. There is a sense of flesh that is evil, and there is a body which is good. Your flesh, this stuff that you can touch and so forth, is not in itself evil. Paul never indicates it's evil. We've sometimes transferred it because of the way we use language. We've sometimes begun to think that maybe our flesh is evil, and so you have people who sometimes beat up their flesh thinking they're doing themselves good. I tend not to take that as a prescription for how to handle evil. But he does say there is within us this kind of competition between natures. And so in the Old Testament and in the passage from Leviticus that we read earlier, you have God saying, be careful. I expect you to do things fairly. I expect you to do things beyond fair. You were an alien in a foreign country, Israel, and I brought you out of that country. And so whenever you see an alien, you're going to treat them as though they are a citizen. You're going to give them every opportunity to enjoy your favor. You're going to welcome them. You're going to be hospitable to them. And I think that extends to us in today's world in terms of the way we greet strangers, the way we greet people who are different from us, the way we greet even folks from Texas. Y'all have done a great job. You need to be fair in your measurement. But that's hard to do. Because there is within us this dual nature. And sometimes we tend to weigh the scale a little bit more toward our side. We want everything fair. We just want it to be a little more fair for us. Spiritual fruit is the fruit that nurtures that which God wants to plant within us. Spiritual fruit is that which goes to that good side of our nature, the divine side of our nature, the part of our nature that has been planted in us by God Himself. If we feed, if we nurture that spiritual fruit, we will develop a field of fruit. Paul describes this great panoply of fruit that can be developed in our life. He doesn't limit it to just one. Nowadays we tend to grow one crop at a time. But Paul is saying you can plant a field that's got all kinds of fruit in your life. Good fruit. Fruit that he says has no law associated with it. You don't have to worry about measuring it. Ever try to measure how much love you have in your life? Ever try to measure how much patience you have in your life? That's generally a mistake. Ever try to measure how much self-control you have in your life? Not a good thing for me to do. Paul says, forget about the measurement. Allow the Spirit to lead you, to guide you. Focus upon devoting yourself to that leadership, and that fruit will develop within you. Probably the quantities you cannot measure. In his fictional book, Sophia House, author Michael O'Brien tells this story. He says, in the Middle Ages, a famous young painter was hired to create a mural above the high altar of a great church in Paris. The subject was the life of Christ. The author labored with persistence for many years, and his mural became known as the marvel of its time. Yet it remained incomplete. The artist, try as he might, could not complete two of the faces, the Christ child and Judas Iscariot. Whenever he attempted to fill these empty spaces, the results were out of harmony with the rest of the work. The artist was greatly dissatisfied with the situation and could not understand why, despite his talents, he was unable to bring the mural to completion. He prayed for inspiration daily, and not long afterward, while he was walking on the streets of the city, he happened upon a group of children playing. Among them was a boy who had the face of an angel and who just radiated goodness. The artist invited him to sit as a model for the Christ child. With his parents' permission, the child did, and the finished image was considered a masterpiece. Yet the artist could still find no model for the face of Iscariot. The story of the artist's quandary spread far and wide throughout the country, and many people, considering themselves the possessors of wicked, deformed, corrupt faces, offered to pose as the betrayer. To the artist, none of them seemed quite right for the part. He wanted a face so twisted and ruined by its surrender to depravity that all who gazed upon it would see sin incarnate. Years passed, and the artist would often go to church to pray for inspiration. He longed to complete the mural, yet in his heart he hoped that the face of Judas would forever elude him, that no human soul would ever be so deeply sunk into sin that it would provide the perfect model. Then one afternoon, as he sat in the church, a beggar staggered down the aisle and knelt at the steps of the altar. He reeked. His clothing hung in rags from his haggard figure. He was not an old man, but he was hunched over as if weighed by an immense brokenness and dark memories. The face was exactly what the artist was looking for. He took the broken man home with him, fed him, washed his diseased flesh, clothed him, spoke to him warmly as if with a friend. He instructed his children to treat the visitor with the greatest respect. His wife, a kind and devout woman, prepared fine meals for him. The poor man dwelt in their midst as if he were made of stone. He was completely unable to speak. He was, however, willing to sit as the artist's model. Weeks went by, the work progressed, the beggar would look from time to time at the image of himself materializing on the canvas. Curious grief and horror would fill his eyes. One day, seeing the model's distress, the artist paused in his labor and laid down his brush. "My friend," he said, "your heart is troubled. What is it?" The man buried his face in his hands and burst into tears. After a long moment, he lifted up his eyes to the old painter. "Do you not remember me?" he said. "Years ago, I was your model for the Christ child. There is within us dual nature, a divided heart. And if we feed one, it will grow. And if we feed the other, it too will grow. So you must feed what you wish to grow." Sociologist Rodney Stark has written a brilliant book, The Rise of Christianity, in which he describes how how Christianity arose from a small group to become the dominant force of the Roman Empire in such a short time. He presents factors that would have contributed to this great movement towards Christ, and he shows that there were two great epidemics during the first few centuries. If those who were affected were cared for, there was a good chance they would survive. But often when a member of the family contracted the disease, the other family members left that person uncared for and left their homes for places not yet affected by the disease. The Christians, however, did not do this. The Christians cared for their own family members and also cared for those who were left behind by their own family. Stark points out that this willingness to suffer in order to care for the sick had a part to play in large numbers of people in the Roman Empire turning to Christ. We stand at an interesting age. Often it is reported to us, and it is certainly a true observation, that the popularity of Christianity has declined. Many of you may have heard of the Pew study that's been released recently, and all of the decline of faith in the United States. Some even question. I remember going to one church, and the chair of the board asked me, "Do you think the Methodist Church will survive?" I think it probably will. I don't know what for. I'm not even really all that concerned about that question. I'm not even concerned about the question of whether Christianity will survive. Because Christianity will survive as long as we follow the Spirit. Christianity will begin to thrive as long as we bear the fruit of the Spirit. It is the fruit of the Spirit that convinces people to follow Jesus. It is the fruit of the Spirit that convinces you and I that it is worthwhile to continue to devote ourselves to following His lead. It is the fruit of the Spirit that diminishes in me the hippopotamus, that produces within me the wings of an eagle. There was a man, he had an orange, and he tasted that orange and he thought it was the sweetest, juiciest, most delicious orange he had ever tasted. And so he enjoyed consuming the orange and he saved the seeds. But he had no land, he had no fertilizer, he had no means to grow an orange grove. So he went out into the street and he said, "I have tasted the best orange ever in the world. I have the seeds in my hand. Someone give me land. Someone give me fertilizer. Someone give me the means whereby we can grow an orange grove." Everyone laughed. All he had were seeds. There was another man. He had another orange. And as he tasted that orange, he thought it was the sweetest, juiciest, most delicious orange in all the world. But he had no land. He had no fertilizer. He had no means by which to reproduce that fruit. And so he went out into the street. And he said, "I have tasted the most delicious orange in all the world. Come, take a slice. Taste it and see. Give me land. Give me fertilizer. Give me the resources so that together we can build the greatest orange grove in all the world." And people came. tasted, and they did build that one church. You and I, we can nurture and grow within our lives, not as individuals, but as a community, fruit of the Spirit. And if we will share that fruit with each other and with the world, we will develop an orchard that will replenish the world, that will feed